All right. Think the screen share is our cue. Welcome, everyone. Thrilled to see you all. We're very excited to be at this point. I want to start just by thanking the launch committee for all of the work that they have done over the last few months, the regulators for their continued engagement and involvement and input, Sarah for her masterful facilitation of our crazy little group, and to all of the rest of you for continuing to show up and engage and provide input. We would not be here without all of the efforts and time and creative thinking that you've all put into this. And it really has, I think we've really kind of broken the mold on the ability for stakeholders to come together and collaborate in ways that that we haven't before, but that all of our previous efforts have enabled for today. So this is, I think we're at a very exciting point on this journey, and we've gotten here really fast. The letter from last July set out an obscenely fast timeline, but we have, which we did not meet. However, I think what we've been able to accomplish in really just a year is pretty astounding. So we're excited to present this proposal to everyone. Really excited to get feedback and hear questions and input, and are just, I think, proud to be where we are at this point in time. Pam, did you want to say anything as well?
I also want to share my thanks for the whole launch committee's efforts here today, as well as a recognition, especially of Kathleen and your leadership to bring us here. Scott noted, I'm usually the one on the phone, so it's very clear that Kathleen has been the one that's really kept our group together and been the driver that really has brought this very extensive document and the recommendations that we have here today, just the clear driving force behind where we are today. So thank you, Kathleen, and to all of our launch committee members.
Thank you, Pam. Sarah, you want to go to the next slide? Well, we'll do a quick agenda review and then want to open it up to our launch committee and regulators to provide some comments, just reflections on where we are in the process. We're going to provide a little bit of background, again, grounding us in where this recommendation came from and why we've landed where we have. We'll walk through the elements of the proposal and then welcome input and questions from stakeholders on this call, and then we'll talk about a little bit about next steps. And so with that, I think I'd love to start, and we're going to have to probably come back to some launch committee comments. I know we've had some scheduling challenges with some of our launch committee and regulator representatives, but would love, I think, maybe to start, Commissioner Tawney, if you are on, want to make sure that we give you a chance to kind of chime in here and provide your thoughts to start.
Thanks so much. I appreciate fitting around the schedule. There's a really important conference in Oregon today with our consumer advocate, talking about all of the really challenging issues we have in the region, but also just in Oregon. So thanks for the opportunity. You know, I'm really struck as I look at step 2 at what's being described, as I have walked with the launch committee, as you have all grappled with whether the model that the regulators suggested would work, would hold water. I'm really, really struck by the power of what has been proposed. And that is, at its core, to set up real parity between the balancing areas, between the California BA and all of the other BAs in the West. And what that then unlocks in terms of opportunity by putting everybody on the same footing, making decisions at the timing that works for them, for their community, for their regulatory agencies or bodies, is really creating an opportunity for customer value that we had hoped would be there when we put the letter out. And it's exciting to see really emerge in the framework that is encapsulated in this proposal. And, you know, I want to reflect that it wasn't for a lack of trying by a lot of really thoughtful folks over many years to crack this nut, but really stopping to understand how unreasonable an ask it is to say, I would like you to please regionalize one BA ahead of any other BA. Like if somebody had come to me and said, I want to take PGE's balancing area, put it under regional governance, and maybe some folks will join you later, I'd have immediately said, what about PGE's customers? And I'd have had some questions, some concerns, and I might have had a big reaction around, no, I think we will be keeping those decisions to protect PGE customers a little closer to home. And I think what we've all stopped and done is said, wait a minute, we are all deeply aligned on protecting our customers, on protecting affordability, on thinking through reliability and how we can all work together. How can we be more balanced in how we do that and make the same, put each other sort of on equal footing? And what might that create? And I think what I see here in step 2 is an opportunity for California to take decisions in the timing that works for them once we have the independent RO and they are governing the market. And other states, Nevada has its legislation. Oregon might go slower because we've got to see the customer benefits for step 3, but that everyone can take those choices for step 3 at the phasing, at the timing that works for them, or choose not to take them. We have some states that don't want to go beyond, and that's okay. And that's really exciting that we're creating this uniquely Western space for local empowerment while also maximizing the value we get from co-optimizing all the generating units together. It's really been exciting to see it come to fruition. And I am really appreciative of the focus on customer value, the focus on keeping costs down, the focus on maximizing the opportunity for optimization, the focus on managing for a fundamentally uncompetitive West with a really strong governance model. And so I look forward to hearing all of the comments that we get from the region. And I want to echo the thanks. I have engaged in this work for a lot of years, and I know how time consuming it is, and have been so impressed with the caliber of dialogue and the respectful tone of dialogue that has really made finding solutions possible. And so I'm excited to see what the next step brings. So thanks so much, Kathleen and Pam and the launch committee for taking up the challenge and really centering customers in how you responded to it.
Thanks, Commissioner Tawny. Do we have any other regulators? I know we have a handful joining us later. Commissioner O'Connell, see you pop on.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks. I just wanted to take a minute to, first of all, acknowledge the importance of this milestone. It's a big one. Just for me, a little bit of reflection, when we signed that letter back in July, over a year ago, it made sense to me that if we could pursue the largest possible footprint, that would maximize consumer benefits. But then how could that happen was kind of a leap of faith for me anytime when I wrote that letter. So one thing that I think is just wanted to acknowledge in this moment is, congratulations to the launch committee for getting to this point. And then thank you very much to the stakeholders for helping build it up to this point. And so, I'm just in a moment where went from leap of faith to now I can see it, that this idea that largest possible footprint is available, and that we could maximize consumer benefits that way. And this work isn't happening in isolation, right? There's a lot of economic analysis out there that utilities have been doing and other entities have been doing, and it helps put the math behind the concept that more consumer benefits available if we can get to the widest possible footprint. And then this piece of it is super important because it takes that concept to a potential reality. So again, just in this moment of reflection of where I was at when I signed the letter versus where I'm at now, and don't want to sugarcoat it. There's still a lot of work to do, but this is an important milestone, and the fact that there are so many folks on this call this morning is another just affirmation that the idea was sound. It's attracted a lot of interest. As Commissioner Tani said, that interest has been converted to let's work together collaboratively to find solutions. And so just wanted to pop on this morning and say thank you to all who are involved and got us to here.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. Any other regulators that we have on? Sorry, there's scrolling through. It'd take me a moment. Carl.
Yeah, just a former regulator who works with regulators. I just wanted to say how amazing it is that how this group of regulators has stayed with this, with the difficult day jobs that they have now, especially with the affordability challenges that we face throughout the West. I just want to attest to the fact that a significant number of regulators and staff people who have been assigned to follow this along on a week-by-week basis. And I just think it's a real testament to the quality of the work that you all have produced, that they continue to see the value in showing up and keeping up. So thanks a lot. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Carl. Maybe we'll jump to some launch committee comments. Scott, I know you had your hand up, so I'm happy to start with you.
This is get my camera on. This is an important milestone for us. I think, because we've been hanging together now for almost a year, and with increasing frequency over the last 5 months. Once we got to agreement on step one, and then how could we craft step two, which, as everybody can tell by the 130-page document that landed last week, it's a more complex issue. Having said that, I hope that everybody will understand that we came at this, I think, in a very thoughtful way. And as you can tell, the one particular issue that was of tremendous focus for me was the composition of the RO from the beginning. We were wrestling between option 2.0 and 2.5. And this is, so my perspective comes from somebody. I said at Crepsey in April, I said my fondest wish would be for a single tariff and a single security constrained economic dispatch over the West. And then I quickly realized that my wife would have heard that, and I said my fondest professional hope would be that. But so as a concept, but I'm a realist. I understand that we do things incrementally in the West for a variety of reasons, and some of which are very good reasons. And this organic effort required an incremental approach. And we wrestled with the composition of the market, the RO, being under the rubric of 2.0, which was more of a lighter touch but still an independent entity in charge of the tariff as it pertained to market rules, or the more robust 2.5. And there was good, healthy debate. And I think where we ended up reflected the good natured and well-intentioned efforts of the launch committee to try to reach compromise that met everybody's needs. 2.0 was where we're recommending the initial landing for the RO. If you know, but then that we are leaving it to the RO itself to undertake an effort to look and see if they should move to 2.5. We've recommended that they move over a period of time to 2.5. And the reason is because we want this entity to be able to grow and to be able to start to implement the day-ahead markets that we've all agreed, it seems almost across the entire West, that we want to engage in a day-ahead market. And then many of us hope that that will grow. And I think that people will find over time that they'll want it to grow into something more like an ISO. But that will be up to the future. And I think what we've proposed is an attempt to give a reasonably low cost but independent entity the ability to start and give the confidence in terms of an independent market that will then position itself to grow if the stakeholders in the West want it to grow into something else and offer different services. So it was it was a real debate, and it was an excellent debate at the end of the day. And I think we landed in a place that will allow us to grow into something over time that will be even more special than what I think is a special opportunity for the West in the creation of the regional organization. So it was a lot of good discussions over the summer, and I'm pretty pleased with where we've landed, and hope that the stakeholders agree.
Thanks, Scott. I think we had a couple of others who I know had offered up. Michelle, were you on? Able to jump in?
Yes, here it comes. Well, I will take a slightly different position. Sorry. Oh, I don't know. There we go. I think as a consumer advocate, I often come to these sorts of initiatives from a defensive posture. And while most of us recognize potential benefits in markets, it often feels as if it doesn't get designed to actually reach the folks that we represent. So over time, as I've participated here, it's been very heartening to see the continued focus on public interest and customer benefits, as Commissioner Tawney said at the beginning. And so I don't want to take too much time. I know you have several people, but I'll just say that that it's genuine. So you read these words on the paper of what the mission is, what the decision criteria are. We'll see those in upcoming slides, and I feel like it's genuine. So it's been very interesting to participate in an initiative that is oriented differently, and I appreciate that. And you'll see there's work to be done, and we're really interested in hearing genuine response from folks as we finalize things going forward. But I just wanted to jump in to say that the focus is unique and appreciated and genuine.
Thank you, Michelle. Heidi.
Thanks. So Heidi Rotz, Clean Energy Buyers Association. I have to say, my feelings are very similar to Michelle in terms of the importance here is how differently oriented this whole effort has been. I represent large energy customers who are hugely impacted by markets, but historically haven't had a significant seat at the table in terms of market governance. So just thanking everyone for getting us to a place where we're another step closer to a market that is just focused on maximizing customer benefits from the very beginning. And I am feeling really hopeful about step 2 and where we landed, because I do think we're in a place where the future governance of this RO is innovative and is driven by its stakeholders. And then maybe just one more quick comment. I know we need to move on. There are so many details in the step 2 proposal, and I'm personally thankful that we had space and time to review background documents, to talk to each other in workshops, and think not just about different options, but different viewpoints in order to get to the step. And I'd really encourage this level of collaboration moving forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Heidi. Any other members from the launch committee want to make a comment at this point? All right, great. Well, we can come back and we'll go ahead and jump into the substance. And I'm going to take some of the first part. Pam and I are going to kind of tag team this presentation, as we have now done a handful of times, and then look forward to additional feedback and questions at the end. So just a quick reminder of where we started here with the mission of the Pathways Initiative Launch Committee, to develop and form a new and independent entity with independent governance structure that is capable of overseeing an expansive suite of West-wide wholesale electricity markets and related functions. And then based in these core principles that are up on the screen, really thinking about the largest footprint and maximizing consumer benefits. Again, with the independent governance, recognizing that this has been a critical, this is what the fundamental and critical reason that we're having these conversations. Building upon the CAISO market structures, minimizing duplication and incurrence of costs, and being able to evolve and add additional market services up to and potentially including an RTO for those who want it from a voluntary basis moving forward. So those were really the principles that the launch committee agreed to include in our mission that were founded in the original letter from the regulators last July. So these have been sort of our underlying principles that we've put everything through in all of our work and conversations, rooted here in this mission. Next slide, please. As part of that, we developed a set of evaluation criteria, again, that kind of emphasize these same principles. And one that we wanted to make sure that we flag here is this number 8 here in blue: respect for state authority to set procurement, environmental reliability, and other public interest policies. This has much like this really falls in the category of public interest, and has been a really important part of the work that we've been doing, recognizing that this is something that is important to every single state that is participating and every utility in the West, being able to have each state set and regulate and maintain their own energy policies, and trying to make sure that we're setting up a structure where no one state's policies is exported or imposed on any other state. This is something that we hear from all of our state partners. That is a fundamental part of it's been a fundamental concern, and this is a fundamental priority. And so this was really important for the work and the conversations that the launch committee and our stakeholders had throughout this process. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, we, with lots of stakeholder input, landed on a stepwise process. The first step, which we finalized earlier this spring, and that the CAISO the Board of Governors and the WEM governing body unanimously approved in August, elevates the WEM governing body to have primary authority over the market services, the EIM, and then ultimately EDAM, elevating that from its current status of joint authority to this primary authority. It includes a dispute resolution process, and then ultimately a jump ball filing at FERC if there is disagreement between the CAISO board and the governing body about any changes to the tariff that oversees the market services. This is a change that could happen within the current California law, but it did not go far enough from an independence standpoint that we felt that this was a place that we could stop. And that's why we continued with step 2, to create a new and separate entity that could then have sole authority over the market services and contract with the CAISO for the operations of those services. Step 3 is that future evolution to be able to add additional market services beyond the real-time and day-ahead services. But developing that at this point in time was beyond the scope of the Pathways Initiative, and will be something that the RO is able to take on in the future on its own, with additional stakeholder input, when those services are ripe and demanded by participants in the West. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Pam to jump into the draft proposal, and we'll start with sort of the structural recommendations.
Thanks, Kathleen. So on this slide, I want to really emphasize one of the reasons that the Pathways Initiative is so different than previous regionalization initiatives. The different functions that are listed here on these different colored slides are the totality of functions that are offered by an RTO or an ISO, including the CAISO. Previous regionalization efforts were focused on regionalizing all of these initiatives or all of these functions at once. And as Commissioner Tawney pointed out in her comments, it was creating an inequality between what the California parties were giving up and what the receiving parties were retaining. So what we really did here at the start of the Pathways Initiative is focus specifically on the governance of the energy markets. And that is what our option here is, enabling the independent oversight of specifically the energy markets. That is enabling a parity relationship between the CAISO and the CAISO balancing authority and the reliability functions associated with that, and the governance of the energy markets that can be uniquely operated under this regional organization that will have a separate and fully independent governance structure. Next slide, please. So this slide talks about the elements of independence, and we will get into some of the details of each of these as we go along. But the overall perspective here is that our proposal is broken down into several key elements. We're proposing a new regional organization with a fully independent board that is independent of any single state or market participant. We have organizational components that support that independence. There are components to the staffing with dedicated staff and advisory input into the market operator staffing. The tariff will include full 205 filing rights over provisions related to the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the extended day-ahead market. And there are additional provisions that focus on the stakeholder process and protecting the public interest that really Michelle and others were an important part in developing those recommendations. Next slide, please. Getting into the different perspectives. So our step 2 proposal recommends starting the RO under option 2. This would be a policy setting organization for the establishment and oversight of the market rules for the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the extended day ahead market under sole authority of the new regional organization. This option plants a seed and enables us to quickly stand up this organization and then to staff it with a board and independent oversight to enable it to grow into option 2.5. There are additional complexities associated with option 2.5 that we will get into throughout this presentation, but our belief here and our recommendation is centered on enabling the standing up of this organization as quickly as possible, getting it the structure and staffing that it needs to undertake the complex work that is required to move into option 2.5, and really establishing that kind of step 3 envisioning that Kathleen talked about, as the RO can continue to offer on a voluntary basis the additional incremental services that will provide the value to Western customers and Western stakeholders that are desired by and driven by the stakeholder community of the West. Next step, please. Under option 2.0, we really are planting the seed of this new regional organization. It will have full governance authority over the market rules related to the Western markets with full Section 205 rights. It will have, but we will retain a single integrated tariff, and that is due to the complexity of unwinding the tariff on day one. The CAISO tariff will have different sections that will have full authority from the RO, full authority for the CAISO related to the balancing authority and transmission provider functions and the resource adequacy functions in the CAISO tariff, and shared authority over those sections where there are market rules that are integrated with other operational functions that the CAISO will retain. Market operations will be performed and overseen by the CAISO, and the CAISO will remain counterparty to existing market contracts. And there are thousands of these contracts, which is another layer of that complexity. CAISO staff will retain emergency operational authority, and I understand this is an area where stakeholders have some questions. What this really means is that the CAISO staff, just like all other operations staff today, are empowered to make the decisions needed in the moment to keep the lights on. I know we've all experienced the challenges of extreme weather and other significant reliability impacts that require the professional staff in the control room to be able to take actions necessary to preserve regional reliability. And this provision is really addressing that issue. This is not a governance function. It is really enabling staff to take those actions under their authority that all balancing authority operators are empowered with across the region today to really use their operational judgment in the moment. Under option 2.0, we estimate that there will be startup costs of $1.25 to $1.5 million, representing the costs of the board and the initial startup staff, and that as we are growing that organization, option 2.0 could increase to about $10 to $14 million. This is a recognition that the onboarding and development of an organization will take time and enables this organization to have small seed funding that will grow as the organization develops the tools and tariffs needed to fund itself. Next slide, please. Under option 2.5, and we recommend, as noted previously, that the RO undertake this evaluation very quickly after being established. Option 2.5 enables the RO to have full governance authority over the regional market rules with ultimate responsibility for operations of the market and full Section 205 rights. This could include a full separation of the regional organization's tariff from the CAISO tariff. But again, this would take some time and engagement and a lot of attorneys helping us out to really ensure that the tariff evolves to create reliable and economic operations that create a clean separation of these tariffs. The other components under 2.5 are around fiscal responsibility and liability and the compliance obligations associated with for compliance and tariff administration. These will also shift to the regional organization. However, the CAISO will continue to serve as the market operator under a vendor contract to the regional organization, minimizing the overall costs of this framework. We believe that the RO will become a public utility under option 2.5 associated with those compliance and reliability requirements. And the RO will begin to will become the counterparty to those thousands of CAISO contracts. We believe that under this option, the annual cost would be about $25 million due to an increase in staffing requirements to enable these additional functions. Next slide, please. Kathleen, I believe this one is turning it back to you.
Thanks, Pam. So I'll work through these pieces pretty quickly. As far as the formation goes, and our recommendation was to create the new RO as a 501c3 nonprofit. We evaluated several different structures, including other of the 501c structures as well as LLC, and landed on a 501c3 in part because of its tax exempt status for lower costs, and that this is a structure that is rooted in the public benefit. So really anchoring, again, this entire organization in a structure that is keeping the public interest in mind. We debated as far as where the incorporation of this organization should be. The value in incorporating in California versus somewhere else, thinking about both the practical the practical implications of where we're incorporating this entity, as well as the independence and perception issues. And because of the really well-developed body of corporate law in Delaware, and that is a state where many corporations incorporate, we decided that there were benefits from an independence standpoint to recommend incorporation in Delaware. We had some similar conversations around the principal place of business. And ultimately, we are recommending that the RO board determine where the principal place of business for the RO should be, but with a strong consideration for Folsom, given the close relationship that the RO is going to have with CAISO, and the need for some pretty regular interaction and collaboration with the CAISO as the market operator. Certainly, we think it's important, though, to keep the board moving around the West and to be able to have opportunities for people to join easily and participate easily in these conversations. So recommend that board meetings rotate around the market participating states in the West as we go. Next slide, please. We also recommend, is this one mine? I think this one's mine. On the RO governance, creating a 7-member board with sole authority over the EIM and EDAM. We landed with 7 because this is after, again, a lot of conversation. So the WEM governing body has 5 members. We recognize that there is an increased amount of complexity and oversight and authority that the RO will be taking on with this sole authority, and so felt that 5 was probably not enough. More than 7 at this point could potentially become harder to manage and has some other challenges associated with a larger body. But certainly we think as the RO grows in complexity and additional market services and even staff size, that this is something that could be revisited in the future to evaluate if there needs to be additional board members added down the road. We recommended not reserving any seats for any specific interest or characteristic, but also to put no restriction on the number of current WEM governing body members who are serving that could serve on the RO board. So those who are currently serving on the WEM governing body or new members between now and when the RO gets off the ground, if they are interested in continuing to serve on the RO board, would move directly to the nomination process when we get to that point. We've recommended creating an RO board public policy committee. So this would be a committee of the board to review potential tariff changes and stakeholder initiatives and be in communication with representatives from states, local governments and public power, as well as the power marketing administrations at the federal level, to evaluate and get input on whether or not a proposed tariff change or initiative would have an adverse impact on any local, state, or federal policy, and to report that back, that information and input back to the full board for consideration before the board votes on a potential change. We're recommending a very open process for meetings and decision-making, ensuring that we are rooting transparency in everything that the board is going to be doing. And then recommend a collaborative relationship between the RO board and the CAISO board, including joint meetings for matters of joint authority. Although each board would meet separately for their own sole authority issues. So keeping the lines of communication open, especially for those issues that that would potentially touch on either or both of the individual bodies. I saw the question in the chat. And this is, gosh, now I can't remember exactly. We'll have a nominating committee who would, Jim, yes, thank you. You can take this because I haven't talked about this one in a bit.
Thanks. Yeah, the current approach is pretty much mirrors how the WEM governing body is elected. So there will be a nominating committee made up of stakeholders who will vet candidates and make a recommendation of a slate to the board, and the board would approve the members to its own self. One issue that we know we have is, since the initial board will not be seated yet, is who approves the initial slate of candidates. And we have talked about creating a formation committee, and right now we're thinking the formation committee would serve that role for the initial board.
Thanks, Jim. All right, next slide, please. And we'll definitely have time for more questions at the end too. So if you've got them, then, you know, make sure you hold on to them because we'll want to make sure we address them all. Ultimately, we have a recommendation around setting up the RO as well. So the launch committee is going to create a formation committee probably later this fall that will really start working in earnest at the beginning of next year. That is going to be a subcommittee of the launch committee. We will report back to the launch committee on progress, but the formation committee's job is essentially going to be implementing the recommendations in this proposal for getting the RO off the ground. Many of the recommendations within this document are things for the RO to do once it is in place. But as far as getting this thing started and formed, the formation committee is going to be sort of tasked with doing all of the things like drafting articles of incorporation, board and staff job descriptions, working very closely with the CAISO on all of the various other changes that need to happen. The formation committee will be working to create the initial nominating committee, and then we'll develop transition plans for the governing body, the stakeholder process as it is recommended, and doing some of that simultaneously with the California legislative session, but really looking to incorporate and begin this organization once legislation is hopefully passed and signed in California, that really enables the full authority of what we're proposing in this step 2. We recognize that there's going to be startup funding that we're going to need for the RO before this can be supported by the market. So we're evaluating appropriate funding sources. This includes an open application with the Department of Energy, and support from many of you who have supported this work along the way. Next slide, please. I'm going to take the public interest piece too, and then pass it off to Pam to talk about the stakeholders, the stakeholder process. The launch committee really from the get-go of this Pathways Initiative work has talked about the public interest in sort of two broad categories. The first is really focused on customer interests, including affordability and reliability. And the second is rooted in these state and local policies and respecting each of those in the market design. So these are the sort of two large umbrellas that we've thought about the public interest in, without getting too much more detailed, knowing that each state is going to be able to define and think about public interest in a slightly different way. We didn't want to be too over prescriptive in what this can mean from one state to another. And so we have really thought about the public interest protections as a toolbox that really spans the entire RO and this entire recommendation, really holistically across the entire structure. Next slide, please. So we have a series of tools, and I'll walk through each of these at a relatively high level. Some of these we've talked about already, but thinking about even the RO structure and the board, ensuring that we are including public interest protections in the articles of incorporation and all of the various corporate documents that will be the foundation of this organization. The C3 status is something that is rooted in public interest. Board member qualifications, including some experience in working on public interest issues, is something that is part of this recommendation. And then I've talked a little bit about the rest of these already, this public policy committee, and the transparency through all of the decision-making process. The next tool that we really spent some time talking about was the body of state regulators that currently serves as a conduit for engagement for regulators through the EIM. And we had a lot of conversations about whether and how this body should evolve, and recognizing that it is currently a well-functioning body and entity for state regulator engagement, along with public power and power marketing agency liaisons involved in that as well. We decided that this should remain in place, and that the BOSSR should continue to be a self-governing institution and determine its own ways of engaging and participating in these processes. We're still having some conversations about the BOSSR funding, recognizing that there's some reasons for potentially moving it into the tariff, and then there's some reasons for potentially keeping it the way it is. So we're having some ongoing conversations about that piece as well. But we recognize that this is that having a functional way for state regulators and our public power and PMA liaisons to engage in the policy setting functions is really important. And so we wanted to make sure that that can continue to exist as it is today. Next slide, please. We're also recommending the creation of a consumer advocate organization to facilitate engagement by state consumer advocate offices. This would be a separate nonprofit organization that would receive tariff-based funding to facilitate the work that it will do. But really, this is a proposal to enhance and enable additional education and engagement opportunities for those state consumer advocate offices who are oftentimes very resource strapped, and so being able to help facilitate their engagement in the market processes was really important. We're recommending the creation of an Office of Public Participation. So beyond just the consumer advocates, having a sort of a section within the RO who can help with general information and education to help enable people to understand what the processes are going, how to engage and participate, and really modeling this off of the Office of Public Participation at FERC, and hoping that this is something that will facilitate additional transparency and stakeholder engagement. We have a handful of different recommendations around the independent market monitor and the various market monitor functions, like the market surveillance committee. At this point, this is an area where we're actually really are spending a bit more time kind of evaluating what the relationship for each of these entities needs to be relative to the RO and the CAISO, given that there is some overlap on some of these functions, and then some are pretty separate. But recognizing, I think, fundamentally the importance and value of these independent market monitoring functions, and that having access to the market monitor data, both by the regulatory bodies, the state regulatory bodies, and consumer advocates is really important. So trying to develop a set of recommendations that keeps those functions intact or even strengthens them, but it is responsive to the new structures that we're proposing. And then finally, we've got really public interest kind of interwoven throughout our stakeholder process recommendations that Pam is going to walk through next. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Pam.
Thanks, Kathleen. So we'll talk through the elements of the stakeholder process, including the Stakeholder Representative Committee, the sectors and voting, classification of stakeholder initiatives, and the way we actually work from an idea all the way through board approval, and finally around how we will propose to incorporate voting and transparency into all of these different steps in the process. But I really want to emphasize that the one thing you will not see here is a sector breakdown. And that is because we heard a lot of strong feedback from members of this community and stakeholders around the proposal that we put out. And we are conducting a separate workshop on Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. And I'm very time zone limited, so I can't tell you the different time zones. That's time an issue. 9 a.m. Pacific, my very West Central perspective, but we will be working through getting more into the details around the sector perspectives and the different ways that we should be thinking and framing the sectors, the role of the sector representatives, and how we can evolve that proposal. Once we get feedback from our Monday workshop, we will reissue a proposal on October 14th. So we really would appreciate your active participation in that workshop so that we can get the feedback we need to dial in the sector proposal correctly. Again, thank you to GridWorks for offering to facilitate another workshop for us. We do genuinely appreciate the time and effort and staffing that you have provided to help make these workshops valuable and meaningful ways to gather the needed input into revising this aspect of our proposal. Next slide, please. So the first thing we'll talk about is the Stakeholder Representatives Committee role. The Stakeholder Representatives Committee, or the SRC, is an evolution of today's Regional Issues Forum to enhance that organization's ability to provide more active advice and input into the stakeholder process and really enhance the voice of each sector in that stakeholder process. The responsibility of the SRC will be delineating and providing guidance on the conduct of SRC activities and engaging in the RO stakeholder initiative process. The expectations of representatives will be to support and facilitate participation of the stakeholder community, even aggregate the differing viewpoints of members of a given sector. So if there's a difference in viewpoint between, for example, the Pacific Northwest and the Desert Southwest, the expectation is that the SRC representative can take that sector-based viewpoint and articulate the differences between and the reasons there is misalignment within their sector, as well as work with other sectors to find areas of commonality and alignment. We also expect representatives to attend meetings, to be present and available and engaged in these conversations. Next slide, please. This really looks at the way the SRC will engage, as well as stakeholders will engage with the stakeholder process as an initiative moves from a concept to a board vote. For example, the primary engagement in an active stakeholder initiative will continue to be at the individual organizational level. PGE, Western Freedom, WPTF, we will all continue to show up directly as individual organizations and engage in initiatives that are high priority for our organization. Continues to be individual choice, and to I really be able to dedicate the resources to those stakeholder processes that are most important for our own individual organizations. We expect individual organizations to write comments much in the way they do today. We've heard extensive feedback that comments are the primary way for the board and for the market operator staff to really understand stakeholder perspectives. And there's a strong emphasis on the continued use of comments in illuminating individual organization perspectives and recommendations as a stakeholder initiative evolves. Individual organizations will also vote on their own merits and on their own ideas. And they will also work directly with their sector representative to provide feedback and to help illuminate what the rationale behind their comments, and then work with their sector representatives on areas of consensus or disagreement and driving towards more alignment. Next, the sector representative is one level up. They will help work to build consensus within their sector organizations, facilitate sector engagement in initiatives that are impactful to the sector, as well as help organize sector calls, comments, and engage in the voting identification. We do expect that sector representatives will be supported by the market operator staff, and that they will have institutional support to structure these calls and facilitate the agenda development and scheduling of these meetings. We see these representatives as really a way to help bridge differences and to start working towards consensus positions so that there's an ability to elevate and articulate the sector's perspective on a particular initiative, and to potentially help drive towards a consensus evolution within a given stakeholder initiative. As those representatives engage with the SRC itself, they will start working towards consensus across sectors, finding areas of alignment and providing direct input into the regional organization's independent board on the reasons behind their sector perspective. They may also facilitate stakeholder processes, especially for the different working groups that may arise through the prioritization process. And they will also help with the identification and prioritization of initiatives in the cataloging process. The SRC will also have an opportunity to advise the approved proposals and provide advisory support to the regional organizations board. However, there's also continued opportunities for individual organizations to provide direct feedback and engagement with the board as well. But the SRC will have an opportunity to offer consensus perspectives, as well as articulate some of the divergence that, for example, similar to the example that we covered previously. Next slide, please. So I think many of you have seen this slide before, but it continues to offer, I think, a nice flow chart around the issue development and prioritization process that is fundamental to ensuring that the regional organization and and market policy staff are working on the initiatives that are of the highest importance to stakeholders. The first component of this process is that issue identification and prioritization through the annual cataloging process. The first category of initiatives is compliance or non-discretionary initiatives. This could include compliance with FERC orders or addressing reliability issues or other high non-discretionary issues. One of the key changes to promote the public interest that we have recommended here is that state and local compliance with state and local public policies would also have a compliance prioritization in the road mapping process. So for example, if a state initiative would require a change to the market rules, that would be considered a compliance initiative, but there would also include safeguards to ensure that one state's public policies do not have a negative impact on another state within the market footprint. And then the third category is discretionary initiatives. And that is really where the prioritization process is key to developing the roadmap on discretionary initiatives, and where the voting that we will talk about on future slides will help shape the roadmap consistent with stakeholder priorities. Once the issues are identified, there are different ways that they can move from a concept to a final proposal. The stage one is really around issue evaluation, where a working group is needed to define either the problem statement or a potential solution. And this is where stakeholders agree that there is a challenge or a market need to modify a particular area of the tariff, but where there's not consensus on either problem statements or solution sets. In this instance, the stakeholder representatives community would identify sponsors from their sectors to work directly with market policy staff to help shape the workshops and drive those workshops forward towards the problem statement and definitions. There could also be discretionary initiatives or other initiatives that move directly into stage two, which is a more formal process where the regional organization market staff will drive that proposal and help refine a defined statement into a final proposal that would receive a vote from stakeholders before moving to the regional organization's board for final approval. On the next slide, we also recommend incorporating voting at strategic points in this process. In our proposal, voting will continue to be at the individual entity level. And while entities will be members of sectors, that voting will be at the individual level. So for example, PGE will vote as an individual. We recommend that voting occur periodically, but at some specific points as well. We recommend that the policy roadmap process will have voting on the approval of the final roadmap, and that there would be votes taken during the working group and initiative process, specifically on the problem statement and scope definition, the straw proposal, revised proposal evolution, and also on the final proposal. We note that voting could take place on a snap basis at any point during this process if there is a need to illuminate where stakeholders are on a particular initiative or question, but we do recommend that there be more regular votes at these key junctures in the policy development process. We do recommend that there would be a remand if significant opposition exists, and that if voting meets that significant opposition threshold, which would be defined by each sector within to reach the threshold, that the proposal would go back into the stakeholder process for rework before moving forward to the board to see if there's an ability to address concerns and achieve broader support. And this would apply to final proposals primarily in order to be a temperature check before that proposal is sent to the regional organization board for final approval. While voting will continue to be at the individual entity level, we recommend that there be an automated, tabulated report that will help the board understand the different perspectives or votes by the sectors that could break down around different areas such as geography, sector, line of business, supply ownership, or load ratio share. And this really will help with understanding if there are particular areas of opposition or support. For example, California versus the Pacific Northwest or the Desert Southwest, that there could be geographic alignment while the sector overall might be driving in one direction or another. Or for example, an independent power producer with versus a power marketing sector member could have different perspectives or have different splits within a sector, and that these tabulated votes would be helpful to eliminate those differences for the regional organizations board. And with that, we have made it through our main proposal slides, and we can go on to our next slide and begin to take, I'm sure, the many questions that you have been holding, and hopefully start to get answers for those.
Pam, to that end, can we start? We've got one in the chat directly related to slide 21, which I think is the process slide, and the compliance for state and local public policy initiatives.
So today, compliance with state and local public policy is considered a discretionary initiative and would be prioritized along with other discretionary initiatives. We're calling this up as a compliance issue. I can give a personal example where Oregon has passed a legislation that sets a cap on emissions for Oregon utilities that will become a compliance obligation in 2030. And so that is going to need market adjustments in order for PGE to comply with a state policy that has been adopted in the state of Oregon. While we are in the middle of a workshop on this compliance, it is important for us and for many others to feel that when these public policies happen, that they are treated as compliance, because it really is a compliance challenge for market participants within those states. So this creates a separate category for those, as well as some checks and balances to evaluate if those public policies have impacts on other states that do not share that same public policy. And I see there's also a question, will there be a RIF-like group that's integrated into the SRC and the other two groups for stakeholder engagement? So we see the SRC as really an evolution of the Regional Issues Forum, but that will be supplemented by that Office of Public Participation, so that the current portfolio of the Regional Issues Forum, which has a split between this engagement and advocacy and stakeholder education, will have to be allocated between those two new bodies, and that will work, or that they will have to, I think, work together to find that appropriate split.
Thanks, Pam.
Okay, I think we can get to our questions, and I do believe we can have questions asked out loud. You don't just have to type them into the chat.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even while you all are coming up with your questions, I did want to, I know we've had a couple of additional commissioners join us, and wanted to give Commissioner Hauk an opportunity to weigh in on behalf of the of her engagement as a California Public Utilities Commissioner. Commissioner Hauk, did you want to chime in too? Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, no, this has just been a tremendous process with so many different stakeholders from across the West looking to create something that's going to work for the entire West. And just have been very, very impressed with the process, the engagement by all of the different states and stakeholders, and really looking forward to seeing the comments that are coming back and moving forward on the next steps.
Thanks, Commissioner. And at this point, I too just wanted to touch base again, if there are any other launch committee members who were able to join, who wanted to chime in as well. Any questions from the public about any of the pieces about this? Any comments? Lauren.
Hi, thanks. Good morning. Lauren Tenney Dennison from the Public Power Council. Thanks for your overview, and thanks for what was a very in-depth and informative document. It was a lot to capture and walk through. So apologies if I missed this, but could you talk a little bit more about the process for determining what elements will fall under the RO and the CAISO BAA? I think that in the document, there was a pretty high level principled approach. At one point in previous presentations, there had been a breakout of the actual assignment of various parts of the tariff. And I think in the proposal, it talked a little bit about a stakeholder process. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Pam, you want to take that?
Sure. So for the provisions were specifically related to the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the extended day ahead market will be under the RO's sole authority from day one. The other components that impact the markets will continue to be under joint authority. And the tariff working group did have, I think we published a color-coded section by section document that I am not remembering the specific details off the top of my head, but that one is available on the WE website to peruse. But we do recognize that in order to move, and part of the evolution towards option 2.5 is really helping delineate and separate the sections of the tariff into more that help differentiate the sections of the tariff into RO sole authority and minimize those joint authority sections, so that it's very clear whether it's the CAISO board or the RO board that has the sole authority over the provisions in the different sections of the tariff.
Thanks, Pam. Does anybody from the tariff work group want to add anything?
Yeah, Evie Call from Cal CCA. And I just wanted to add that I saw Scott pop up as well, that there was some intense conversation within the launch committee about how the pieces of the puzzle get separated in order to have the distinct parts of the tariff. And I think the general consensus was that it can be done, and it sort of was done in that process, but we didn't want to presume an end state, and think it's really important for the RO and a stakeholder process to go through that same exercise at some point before a filing ever gets made.
Thanks, Evie. Thanks, Pam. Fred.
Hey there, everybody. It's Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition. First, I can add my appreciation for what everybody has been doing here. People have been saying how long and detailed this is. And my response is, welcome to organized markets. That's how this has to be. And the level of detail and the really thoughtful approaches, I really admire that. Actually, it's taken a long time for us to get here, and this is just a really tremendous proposal. Nonetheless, I'm sure I and others will have lots of questions about it. The one I want to bring up again, that we've already talked about it, is when a public policy related initiative goes through the process, maybe I'm not using the right phrasing here. I would characterize this as something of a fast track process, and it would be reviewed by the Public Policy Committee. And what I'd like to ask is a little bit more discussion about how that will work when a proposal goes to that committee, what happens, and what happens if that committee reports out different things. For example, okay, it's obvious if this looks like it's not going to really have any impact on other states than the one making the proposal. In effect, that's fine. But if there is opposition, or there are minority and majority views or differing views, there can obviously be more than two. What then happens after that?
I'm happy to take a stab at this, and would also welcome additional commentary from other public interest work group members as well. The way we sort of envisioned this committee working is that it would really be keeping regular lines of communication open with states and public power representatives and PMAs, so that there's really kind of an ongoing dialogue, and so that we can flag some of these issues early in these processes through the stakeholder process, so that if there is some kind of issue that needs to get worked out, there's an opportunity through that stakeholder process to continue to get input and evaluate different ways to deal with the particular issue. I think ultimately the sort of report of the input that this committee is collecting is informational, and would go to the full board for consideration before it takes a vote. So ultimately the board vote would have to take this would be part of sort of the record. And I think there's probably a handful of different ways. There could be the board could exercise an elective remand and send it back for more stakeholder input and work. I think there's a handful of different ways, but the idea was, because there are these open lines of communication ongoing, that this would hopefully identify some potential challenges early on and be able to work them out through the stakeholder process with additional opportunities for input.
And could you just confirm the membership of the Public Policy Committee would be board members? Is that correct?
Correct.
So my view of that is that board should be able to, under the articles of incorporation, should be able to, or the bylaws or whatever that's appropriate, should be able to form its own committees for whatever purpose it deems necessary. This would be more of a standing committee, I guess. But I guess my concern here is that if this involves state matters, the relationship between this and the state committee and then other stakeholders, including market participants and non-participants, this is kind of a tricky aspect, because as Pam pointed out, state policies, let's consider those policies that are in fact binding, however you construe that, have to be respected by the market, have to be respected by the entities that are obliged under those state policies, and therefore their market activities. And I think Pam made that point really clearly, noting that I am a PG customer, so I kind of got a skin in the game here too. But nonetheless, and so so are we all for our respective utilities. So I'm just wondering, any thoughts that you or the launch committee had about that, kind of the scope of this committee review process?
Fred, I think I really appreciate your perspective on this, and I I think that this standing committee creates that forum for dialogue, but I do appreciate your thoughts here, and I'm looking forward to seeing them in your comments. Colin.
Hi, this is Colin Smith from LEAP, a demand response aggregator based in California. And I just wanted to kind of maybe walk through the stakeholder process quickly to make sure I was understanding it. Basically, problem statements, or I guess discretionary initiatives will be surfaced within a specific sector. The sector will develop a problem statement. It'll then move to stage 2, where policy development will happen basically jointly between the initial sponsors and the RO staff through working groups. But the RO staff is the one responsible for developing the final proposal, not the stakeholders, but the stakeholders vote on the final proposal before it goes to the SRC or the RO board, or is it? I feel like I might be missing a link there.
Colin, that's a great question. So I would say that sectors will bring forward initiatives into the cataloging and road mapping process. However, once they are selected for either a formal stakeholder process, a stage 2 process, or a working group process, that all of those meetings will be open to all market participants, all stakeholders, whether you are a market participant or not. They will be fully open to there'll be public processes, and that individual stakeholders will be able to participate directly in those processes and advocate as individual organizations. The role of the SRC is really to help bring sectors together to find consensus positions that is not necessarily part of that sector working group process, or the stakeholder work, either the stage 1 or the stage 2 process that is fully open and where engagement is on an individual entity level. The SRC process is meant to help bring members of a sector together to find common ground, or to identify issues that are unique to their sector, so that they can bring those forward on a more consensus basis, or work through either challenges with their sector, or also to help find alignment between sectors. So does that help clarify that when we really are in this part of the process, that engagement is at the individual entity level?
Got it. So the vote is sort of all stakeholders participate in the vote, and the remand process that could be triggered with significant opposition is looking at whether there's significant opposition among all stakeholders, not just stakeholders within a sector.
Correct.
Okay. And then once, assuming there is no significant opposition to a stakeholder proposal, or to the RO staff's proposal, I should say, then that proposal moves to the SRC, and then the SRC votes about whether it moves to the board.
So the vote before the vote in the stage 2 proposal would continue to be at the entity level, and the SRC would tabulate those votes and identify if the vote met the significant opposition threshold, and help collaborate among the different sectors to identify if that threshold had been met for a remand, and identify the issues as to why that opposition took place.
Okay, I think I was confused by this bullet here at the bottom right about that says SRC votes before it moves to the RO board.
Yeah, I was just looking at that too. We need to clarify that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments at this point on the proposal?
This is Vijay, if I may.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm seriously very impressed with the thought that's gone into the issue identification step, and then the second part. And I recognize and appreciate having been on the RIF now 4 years, 5, and recognizing a group for consumer advocates and then for Office of Public Participation. On behalf of the PIOs, we appreciate it because they are intertwined, but yet sometimes have distinct thoughts. My only comment or question would be, which we'll try to put in our comments to WRA, sorry, my voice is hoarse, is there anything that's worked really well with the RIF that we are missing out on in this structure? That's just one thing to keep in mind. And right at the beginning, you suggested that California could be the home to a 501c3. Are there any extra burden of reporting and regulatory requirements? Believe me, that's coming from me, from WRA, that would create expense or cost. I get it about having the control room and all that set up in here, Folsom, or informational awareness and connection and everything. But I'm just curious about, I don't know how many strings get attached to a 501c3 when we want to be very creative in getting good funding to get it going really well. Maybe I'm being overthinking it, but thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. I think your comments on the RIF are helpful. We've had some of those conversations ourselves. And I think as as the formation committee starts to take on this thought process and effort to develop a transition plan for really implementing the stakeholder process for the RO and what that means in collaboration and coordination with the CAISO, I think looking at all of the various roles and benefits of the RIF was something that we have on sort of our list of considerations, and want to make sure that we're not losing anything as we're making this transition. And then I think to your question on the sort of incorporation and where the principal place of business, I think that we did quite a bit of work on evaluating the various benefits of different state incorporation places. So where the various bodies of law exist that are beneficial to corporate structures, and felt that Delaware provided a relatively easy corporate law home for the structure. I think the having the principal place of business in California, those were also elements that we balanced here. But certainly this is partly why we wanted to leave this open to the RO board for additional consideration from a relationship standpoint with the CAISO, from access to stakeholders, and the specific role that the RO will be taking on. So appreciate the thought.
Thank you. I misunderstood. This is great to hear. I got my wires crossed earlier. So thank you. This is great.
You bet. Anyone else? All right. Well, we can talk a little bit about next steps and the timeline for step 2. So obviously we are already here on this second bullet, October 4th. I'm pretty sure I missed an entire month of this year, but here we are at the beginning of October. As Pam mentioned, we have a workshop scheduled for Monday to talk about sectors specifically, so please join us for that conversation. And we will release a new sector proposal on the 14th. October 25th, we are looking for comments on both this full step 2 proposal and the revised sector proposal. And we'll take a couple of weeks as a launch committee to review and incorporate and evaluate all of the stakeholder feedback that we get to make final revisions on our proposal for a release of final proposal on November 15th, and a public meeting on a week later on the 22nd, where we will walk through probably at a high level, the recommendations in that, really highlighting the changes and the feedback that we've gotten. And then we'll have an opportunity for public comment and to take a vote in public, as we have set out from the get-go, really wanting to make sure that we have our decision-making process in public. At that point, you know, beyond that, the launch committee will then create a formation committee that will start some of the, as we mentioned, some of the implementation tasks that are going to be, you know, that are going to be necessary for getting the RO off the ground. Once we have a final proposal, it is the contents of that final proposal that are going to inform what legislative changes need to happen. So for those of you who are wondering, where is the bill language and where are the sponsors? We're not ready for that quite yet. And that was never really contemplated for this timing. Wanted to make sure that we have a final proposal in hand before we start to really evaluate what legislative change needs to happen, and further those conversations with the legislature. As a reminder, the launch committee is not engaging in any legislative or lobbying work. And so that will be really, I think, led by some of the California-based members of the launch committee and some of our partners who will be engaging on those efforts and working with the legislature to try to achieve the goals of this step 2 proposal. So that will be happening, you know, over the course, hopefully, of the 2025 legislative session. And we are optimistic that we will then be in a position to get the RO off the ground once that process is complete, and get an RO started in, you know, late 2025, early 2026. I think the other thing that is worth noting too, you know, as we really look at the scale of this recommendation, part of the reason that we really thought it was important to start with option 2.5 is that it is going to take some time to get this thing started and to get the board in place and the staff in place and to start this momentum. Pam has a really lovely analogy of planting a seed and letting this thing grow. And we think that 2.0 is a good reflection of the incremental progress that we've been able to make in the West. It really sets up that path and enables this group of stakeholders and beyond to continue to provide input and grow this entity into the market construct that we all need and demand in the West to meet our affordability, reliability, and climate goals. So we're excited about this step. We're excited about the framework that this proposal sets out for where we want to go in the long term. And we are looking forward to continue to engage with all of you over the course of the next few weeks, and then really, you know, ongoing into 2025 as we start to get this thing off the ground. Next slide, please. For public comments, we have the same email address that we have used thus far. We have also posted a stakeholder comment template for this step 2 proposal that highlights a few key areas where we are really specifically looking for input, but of course looking for more broad input across the entire proposal as well. Please reach out through this website, which is monitored regularly, if you have any questions along the way, and or any of your sector representatives who serve on the launch committee. If you have additional clarifying questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, thank you all again for your time, for your interest, and we look forward to getting this thing all wrapped up and final. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Great job, Kathleen and Pam.